Platoon is an anti-war film. It portrays combat from the American military personnel's point of view. It does not make war look like fun. Instead, the film showcases the unforgiving and harsh realities of war on both the American military personnel and on Vietnamese civilians. Also, the film highlights that American soldiers brutally and continuously suffered casualties at the hands of the Viet Cong. Consequently, they struggled to not only stay alive, but they struggled to maintain their sanity. Eventually they became unfazed by death. They accepted that death was all around them. If anything, they welcomed it as a way to escape their harsh circumstances. And by the end of the film, the soldiers had an attitude of all hope is gone. One way or the other, they just wanted out of the war, dead or alive. Its relationship to reality is that the movie was written and directed by Oliver Stone, who fought in the Vietnam War and based this film upon his own experiences. He highlights how soldiers at the start of the Vietnam War were idealistic young men who were looking for great adventure, but little did they know they would soon come to realize and experience firsthand the horrific atrocities and the numbing reality of the Vietnam War. The conflict depicted in the film is the height of the Vietnam War in 1967, which was fought between the Communist North Vietnam, also known as the Viet Cong, against South Vietnam and its supporting allies, the American military and Allied forces. Upon reflecting about the film's message about war, one can distinguish that war is hell. War is like being on death row. For example, when the character King finishes his 12-month duty, he celebrates like he has been released from prison. He celebrates like he has been exonerated from death row. Also, the film showcases that the wealthy and the rich class of society always evade fighting in wars. Instead, they always exploit the lower social class and the disadvantaged into fighting the wars for them. Furthermore, the film establishes how war can dehumanize a person, making people into complete killing machines with no regard for human life. Because of the constant death and devastation which surround soldiers, along with the soldiers' fear, confusion, and anger, they reach a point where they cannot distinguish between right and wrong. A perfect example is Sergeant Barnes, whose extreme interrogation tactics included destroying an entire Vietnamese village and also killing civilians regardless of age or gender. Also, the film highlighted perhaps the only positive aspect of war is that it brought soldiers of different cultures and races together, regardless of the color of their skin. Especially at a time when racial tensions were at an all-time high back in America, they bonded through song and dance, all in the efforts of escaping their unforgiving circumstances. This leads us to the most significant message of the film about war, that there are no winners in war. The film illustrates that war only creates death and devastation. There were over 1 million casualties of not only American soldiers but the Viet Cong and Vietnamese civilians. Accordingly, the film's last message is that those who have experienced war have an obligation to teach others about the horrors of war in order to prevent future wars and conflicts. The companion reading I selected was Leslie Roberts' article Vietnam's Psychological Toll. This article attests that the Vietnam War transformed a generation. It highlights Vietnam veterans are twice as likely to suffer from serious psychological issues, alcohol abuse, and major depression, compared to other soldiers who did not serve in the Vietnam War. Furthermore, drug-related deaths were higher among Vietnam veterans, which many had inherited during their service. This was illustrated in the film, where Chris, King, and Elias turned to drugs and alcohol to escape from the realities of war. But the most astonishing and distressing fact from the article was that 32% of Vietnam veterans had post-traumatic stress disorder since their service, and they are likely to live with it for the rest of their lives. A perfect example of this is in the very last scene of Platoon, where Chris narrates that the war is over for me now, but it will always be there for the rest of my days. Consequently, this reading expertly informed me about the atrocities that the soldiers suffered during the Vietnam War. And whilst viewing Platoon, I understood what was being presented to me, given that Leslie Roberts' article had prepared me for the film. Overall, the reading laid the platform and provided me with a readiness for the motion picture Platoon, and enabled me to be further engaged in Oliver Stone's account of the Vietnam War.